Hello guys, welcome back to Audible Odyssey. So let's step into a world of immersive storytelling where gripping tales of mystery, horror and adventure come to life. Each narration is crafted to pull you into the heart of the story, creating an unforgettable audio experience. From spine-tingling horrors to timeless classics, Audible Odyssey Adventures is your gateway to thrilling journeys beyond imagination. Subscribe now, and let the stories take you to places you've never dreamed of. Audible Odyssey Presents. I always used to hate camping when I was younger, but for the past 5 years I've gone every single year without fail, and I love camping. Now it's a tradition that my friends and I started since graduating from university. I've got a very large group of tight-knit friends. There's 8 of us in all. Some of us were in the same class at university, whereas others became part of the group afterwards through various means. Our very first camping trip as a group was a great success, and at the end of the night we all huddled around the campfire and dubbed ourselves the Council of the Wise. We've used that moniker ever since, and it kind of stuck. The camping trip was such a great success, in fact, that we decided to make it a yearly tradition. A few days away from the stress of work, away from the endless noise of the city, an opportunity for us to drink, laugh and remember that even after all this time we were still friends. But this year felt different. It's strange, I know every year someone says the same thing. Doesn't it feel a bit off? We always just chalk it up to the isolation, the creeping silence of the forest that blows you whole in the dead of night. It's unsettling, sure, but I've known real terror, real horror, and this was just the calm before the storm. I can't quite pinpoint when or why I first started feeling uneasy about this year's trip. Maybe it was the way that Pete was acting. He was always the driving force of the group, but now he seemed distant, almost distracted. Or maybe it was the campsite we chose this year, a new spot, more remote than usual, an isolated place in the forest that looked like it hadn't seen a living soul in decades. Then again, maybe it was just the forest itself. It felt alive somehow, and so I need to tell you my story about a camping trip gone wrong. We arrived at the campsite late in the afternoon with the warm light of the sun filtering through the dense canopy overhead. It was still summer, so we still had a couple of hours of sunlight left to put up our tents. Pete, as usual, had picked the spot. He always took the lead when it came to our trips, and we trusted him. But as we stood there unloading our gear from the cars and looking out into the woods, there was something none of us could put our fingers on. But there were no birds, no whine through the trees, just an eerie stillness. Pete was already setting up the campfire, his face lit by a half smile that never quite reached his eyes. "This is going to be a good one," he said, but I couldn't help noticing the strain in his voice. We all pitched into hell as usual: Rich, Louis, Pat, Simon, Paul, Phil and I. It felt routine, almost mechanical at this point, as we've done it so many times. Tents up, firewood collected, beers cracked open, but that underlying unease still nagged at me. It hadn't been there on previous trips. Maybe it was the new spot, so isolated that we hadn't seen another soul for miles on the drive up. No signposts, no hiking trails, just a lonely expanse of forest that seemed to stretch on forever. By the time the fire was roaring, the nights had fully descended, bringing with it an unnatural darkness. I remember glancing up at the sky and realizing how thick the clouds had gotten. There was also a cloying white mist which had encircled the camp, and we only noticed as someone ducked away to go to the bathroom. There were no stars, no moonlight, just a black, suffocating void. We sat around the fire with a few beers down, already exchanging stories and jokes as usual. As the night wore on, we began to forget about the strange atmosphere and slipped back into our normal routines. As I downed my 4th beer of the night with a smile still firmly on my face and my cheeks sore from laughing, I glanced over at Pete. His eyes were fixed on the rising flames. He was almost in a trance-like state. "Pete, is you okay over there, buddy?" I asked with concern in my voice, as if snapping out of it. He looked up in my direction and smirked. "Yeah man, just making the most of the peace and quiet." We all had busy lives at this point, whether that was family, work or otherwise. a far cry from our relatively carefree lives at university all those years ago, so I could understand him wanting to just chill and stare at the fire. After Pete spoke, the silence lingered for a beat until Simon spoke up next. "It's certainly quiet. I don't think I've seen anything out here at all. It's creeping me out a bit. To be honest, maybe it's just the new spot. I don't know if we're not used to being this secluded." "Secluded is the point," Pete said. His voice flat, eyes fixated on the flames. "That's why we're here, no distractions." Peter had been acting weird ever since we picked him up earlier. He was late to meeting us, which was out of character, but he brushed it off as nothing, mumbling something about traffic. But ever since we'd arrived he was quieter than usual. The night progressed and I began to notice that Rich kept looking over his shoulder as if he was expecting someone or something to be standing in the darkness behind him. I can't lie, I felt it too. It felt as though we were being watched. "This place creeps me out," Phil said after a while, breaking the silence that had fallen over us. "Aside from the crackling fire, I swear I keep hearing things." Saying Louis added, eyes darting towards the tree line like whispers. "Or I don't know, it must just be the wind." There was no wind, but I didn't want to say that and creep the group out further. Pete leaned back in his camping chair staring up into the night sky. "You're just psyching yourselves out," he muttered. "We do this every year, remember? Everything feels weird the first night, especially if we pick a new camping spot. We'll all feel better in the morning." But that didn't do much to reassure me, all the others judging by the nervous glances they kept exchanging. Pete's detachment was contagious. The fire crackled, and for a moment I thought I saw something move at the edge of the light, a figure, a shadow, but when I blinked it was gone. I rubbed my eyes and took a deep breath. I must have drunk too much. I needed to sleep soon. "You all right, mate?" Pat asked me, catching my look. "Yeah," I lied, taking a long swig from my beer. "I'm fine, just tired." But I wasn't. Not long after, when the fire was dying down and the night's chill was biting into our bones, we all decided to call it a night and headed inside our tents. I lay awake for a few moments listening out for any strange noises, but the mixture of alcohol and exhaustion took effect soon after and I fell into a fractured sleep on day 2. When I woke up the next morning with a pounding headache, the first thing I noticed among the brain fog was the quiet. My bladder was fit to burst, so with a groan I clambered out of my warm sleeping bag and emerged from the tent. The fire had long since died out, and the morning mist clung to the trees like a shroud. No one was up yet, which was unusual. Pete was normally the first to rise, having a pot of steaming coffee on the go. But as I crawled out of my tent I saw that Pete's was still zipped shut, no movement. Pat's was the next to emerge, BL-eyed and yawning in the morning. He muttered, "You sleep okay?" I shrugged, "Not really the same. Feels like something's watching us." "You know," he rubbed his neck and glanced around. "Where's Pete?" was. "I don't know, still asleep." I guess an hour had passed, we'd all woken up and were sitting lethargically around the burnt-out ashes of the campfire. No one had seen Pete, yet his tent remained sealed like he hadn't even stirred since last night. It wasn't until we were all gathered around for breakfast that someone finally called out to him. "Pete!" Simon shouted, approaching his tent. "Wake up, you lazy bastard." No response. Frowning, he unzipped the tent expecting to find him groggy and annoyed, but the tent was completely empty, no sleeping bag, no gear, just an empty space where Pete should have been. "He's probably just off exploring," Paul said, trying to sound unconcerned. "You know how he is," but something didn't sit right with me. Pete would never have left without telling anyone. He was the planner, the organizer. He wouldn't just wander off like that. Hours passed and the sense of unease grew. We split up into pairs, searching the surrounding woods, calling Pete's name until our throats were hoarse, but there was nothing, no sign of him, not even footprints on the soft earth. It was like he'd never been there at all. By the time the sun was beginning to set, we were all feeling exhausted and a cold fear had settled over the group. We gathered around the fire once more, but no one was in the mood for jokes. "We should go," Phil said, his voice trembling. We needed to get out of here and call for help. There's no signal. Louis was holding his phone aloft, which had been useless since the moment we'd arrived. We'd have to hike back to the cars, and that's miles away. There's no way we'd find them in the dark. He was right. This particular spot was a fair distance from where we'd parked the cars. It was completely isolated. Then we left first thing in the morning. Simon insisted we could just sit here and do nothing. Pat nodded, agreed. If Pete's really missing, we needed to get help ASAP. It's not like him to just disappear, but Paul wasn't convinced. He must be playing some kind of prank on us. I'm sure he's hiding right now waiting for us to freak out. You know how much he loves messing with us, but no one really believed that. Not this time. The terror in the air was too palpable now. Too real. Pete was gone and we were stranded for the night. Day 3. We didn't sleep much that night. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snapping of twigs sets us on edge. I could feel it in my bones. Now something was wrong with this place, something was watching us, waiting. I woke up just before dawn, my heart racing for no reason. I could explain: the fire had burned down to embers again, casting long shadows across the campsite. I glanced around, hoping to see Pete strolling back to camp with some half-baked excuse for his disappearance, but still there was nothing. His tent remained empty, just as the sun's rays started erupting from the horizon. I started walking around the campsite, unzipping the tents. There was no room for modesty now. We had to get moving, and fast. I moved from tent to tent, shouting everyone's name as I did. So come on, Pat, Phil, time to go. They both begrudgingly sat up in their sleeping bags. Rich, Louis got ready as they both clambered out of their tents with a foggy expression on their faces. I went to the final couple of tents. Simon, let's go, mate, I said, as I unzipped the tent, but to my surprise his sleeping bag looked flatter than normal. Popping my head into the opening, I realized that Simon wasn't there. All that was left in his tent was his sleeping bag, empty. I felt my stomach drop. I scanned around the campsite and shouted his name. No response. The others looked concerned about where he was. Rich cried, "Gone, we need to go now." I insisted on running over to the last tent. I opened it in a panic. Nothing. Paul was gone too. My breath caught in my throat. Panic set in like a thick fog, heavier than the mist still clinging to the ground. Simon and Paul were gone, just like Pete. The others were already out of their tents, standing in a huddle, their faces pale and drawn. "Are you sure you checked everywhere?" Louis asked, his voice tinged with fear. "They're gone," I said, my voice steady but my heart's racing. "We need to leave now." The urge to emergency in my voice must have snapped them out of their grogginess, because within minutes, everyone was packing up what little gear they could. We decided to abandon the tents. There wasn't time to disassemble them. Something was picking us off, and if we waited too long the rest of us would be next. They wouldn't just wander off. Pat mattered more to himself than anyone else. Phil stood in frozen, staring at the empty tents. "This doesn't make sense. What's happening? What the hell is happening?" First Pete, now Simon and Paul. Louis said, his voice low, "Something's out there, something hunting us." His words echoed what we were all thinking, but he was there to say we were being stalked, watched, but by what? No one had seen anything except for those fleeting shadows at the edge of the firelight on the first night. "We had to get back to the cars," I said, my voice firmer now. "If we stay here we're next." Rich nodded in agreement, though his eyes betrayed his terror. "Yeah, let's get out of here. We can call for help once we get signal." And so we formed a loose line heading in the direction that we thought the cars were parked. The trees loomed tall above us, the branches tangled like skeletal. However, the forest now felt claustrophobic, like it was swallowing us whole. The hike back to the cars was brutal. The mist made it hard to see beyond our immediate vicinity, and the trail seemed unfamiliar. Despite having walked it just a few days earlier, it felt as though the forest was a maze with the path seemingly reforming at random. Every few minutes, someone would shout their names into the void, but as before, there was no response. The only sounds were our ragged breaths and the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath our boots. "I don't understand how they could have just disappeared," Rich said, glancing nervously at the trees. "We didn't hear anything, no screams, no struggling. Nothing. Maybe they had gotten lost." Pat suggested maybe they had been looking for something and wandered too far. He was in denial. There was no mistaking this now, not anymore. They didn't wander off. I whispered to myself, something take them. Louis glanced at me, his face drawn tight. "What do you mean something like an animal?" I shook my head. "I don't know what it is, but it's not human. I'm sure of it." They all went silent after that, and for a long while we just walked in silence. The forest felt endless, as though we were walking in circles. We were all starting to feel exhausted. Suddenly there was a crash in the distance, the sound of branches snapping violently. We all froze in place. Our eyes wide. "What was that?" Phil whispered, his voice trembling. But before we could take another step, something or someone came crashing through the undergrowth. It was Pete. He stumbled into view. His clothes were torn and dirty, his face pale and stained with blood. He looked wild, feral, like he'd been running for his life for days, his eyes wide and frantic, locked onto us as he collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. Louis rushed towards him, but he flinched, scrambling backwards as if we were a threat. "Stay back, back," he shouted, his voice ragged and strained. Don't come any closer." "What happened?" I asked, stepping forward cautiously. "Where have you been? Where are the others?" Pete shook his head, his body trembling. "Gone, they're gone. It's my fault, it's all my fault." We stood around him, confusion spreading across all of our faces. This felt like some terrible nightmare. Pete looked up at us, his eyes glistening with tears. I tried to stop it, but it's too late. "They're coming for you now, all of you." I felt my skin running cold because of who's coming to us. "I don't know what they are." Pete whispered, "They live in these woods. I made a deal years ago, they spared me, but only if I brought them others. I knew they'd find me and kill me, too. Otherwise, what the hell are you saying?" Rich yelled, backing away from him, his face twisted in horror. "I was part of another group," Pete said, his voice cracking from years ago. "We came here just like we have now, but they found us, they took us one by one. I begged for my life. I had no choice. They can smell fear, they feed on human flesh." Rage surged through me, and before I knew it I was grabbing him by the collar, lifting him to his feet. "You knew this would happen. You brought us here knowing we'd be killed." "It's not my fault," Pete sobbed, his body limp in my grip. "They would have taken me, they would take all of us," but before I could think of a noise, a low guttural growl echoed through the trees. We all froze. "They're here," Pete whispered, his eyes wide with terror. Ran, and with that, our primal instincts took over. We bolted there and then, leaving Pete behind, crumpled on his knees. The forest closed in around us. As we sprinted, the mist was much thicker. Now it felt like the forest was trying to trap us. I could hear branches breaking behind us as we ran, something heavy moving fast, but I didn't dare to turn my head. My lungs burned and my legs, but I didn't stop. None of us did. Primal fear was the only thing keeping us going. I don't know how long we ran before I heard the first scream. It was Rich. I turned around just in time to see him disappear into the encroaching mist, something dark dragging him off the path, his screams fading quickly into the distance. We had no time to mourn, or it would soon be us next. With my attention diverted, I stumbled, nearly tripping over a road thinking I was done. To my surprise, Pat grabbed my arm pulling me along. "Don't stop," he gasped. We did our best to just keep running, but the forest was a labyrinth. Each twisted tree looked identical to the last. We were completely lost. Every shadow or flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye made adrenaline through me. Another scream. This time it was Louis. He was there 1 second just behind us and then he wasn't. I heard his initial cry of terror, but then deathly silence. "They're picking us off," Phil said breathlessly beside me, his voice barely audible over the sound of our footsteps through the mud and the brush. "We're not going to make it." I didn't answer. I was trying my best to figure out what to do, whether there was any way out of this. What were those things? What had Pete led us to? The dreadful growling was closer now. It felt as though it was coming from all around us. "Damn it," Pat cried, "we should have gotten to the cars by now. Where are they?" But there were no cars nor any path and we were completely exhausted. Phil collapsed to his knees, gasping desperately for breath. I could keep running. He squeezed. "It's over. We're dead." Just as I reached down to pull the poor soul back to his feet, I spotted something directly in front of us. A dark figure standing unnervingly still at the very edge of the mist. It wasn't human. I knew that immediately. Its limbs were too long, its body too twisted, and its eyes, God, its eyes were like burning coals locked on us. Phil let out a choked sob, and before I could reach out to stop him, he ran in the opposite direction. He didn't make it far with a superhuman flash of movement. Phil's scream was cut horribly short and his body was yanked into the shadows. I turned around, fearing the worst. The dark figure was no longer in front of us. I suppressed the scream and grabbed Pat, pulling him close to the ground. "We had to hide," I whispered. We ducked into the undergrowth, crouching low, trying to make ourselves as small as possible. I struggled to contain my rapid breathing, trying to get a grip on the adrenaline flowing through my veins. The creature moved past us, its burning eyes scanning the forest, searching for it. Was so close I could smell it, a disturbing combination of rotting flesh and something metallic like blood. I held my breath as best I could, praying it wouldn't see us. Just as it got so close I could reach out and touch it, Pete stumbled into the nearby clearing. He screamed, running towards us. "Help me please." Ironically, it seemed that he saved us from imminent doom. The creature turned its glowing eyes, locking on to Pete's with precision. In a blur of motion it lunged, long claws, tearing into him. His agonized cries echoed through the forest, a horrible gut-wrenching sound that I'll never forget to this day. Pat and I stayed frozen, watching in horror as Pete's body was torn apart. The sound of the beast feasting filling the air. It was over in mere seconds, and then, just as quickly as it appeared, the creature disappeared back into the mist. For a long moment we didn't move, didn't speak, and then slowly we stood trembling and weak. "We're the last ones," Pat whispered in his voice. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I felt a sharp pain radiating up my leg. I looked down in confusion and terror. I must have cut myself on a trailing thorn or branch. Blood trickled down my ankle, turning my white sock bright red. Pat soon spotted what I was looking at, a wide gash on the side of my calf. "The mist looks to be clearing now. Let me go ahead and I'll find the cars. I'll come back for you. It'll be quicker." It was true, there was no way I could move at a decent pace now. I'd only slows him down. I trusted him to come back, assuming he survived. I pulled my phone from my back pocket in the vain hope of having a signal. Still nothing. It was the only option left. I said, as I clenched my eyes shut in pain, that Pat placed his hand on my shoulder and sprinted off into the brush. I laid prone in the thick undergrowth hoping that those things wouldn't be able to smell my blood, but I thought that if they could, I'd already be dead. An unknown length of time passed, but it felt like hours of rain had begun to fall, and all I could hear was the sound of raindrops on the leaves around me. If I was to die, I could think of worse places to do it. I began to make peace with my situation. At the end, most of my friends were gone. Would it be so bad to join them as I was lost in thought? There was rustling in the bushes at the other side of the clearing. I peered through, wiping the rain from my eyes in an attempt to see clearly. I saw the top of Pat's head emerge from the foliage. I felt a wave of relief. He must have found the cars. We might actually get out of this horrible place, but then my breath caught in the back of my throat, and I froze as his head lifted further. I could see that he had a vacant look on his face, completely blank. It was then that I also saw a dark hand with long claws gripping his hair. "No, it can't be," I uttered in complete shock. Pat's head rose above the bushes and it was held by one of those things. His body was nowhere to be seen. The creature had a cold and detached look on its face. I wasn't sure if they could feel emotion, but it felt like it was showing me that they'd won. Pat was dead and so would I. Soon I struggled to my feet and decided to accept my fate. I limped out into the clearing and, to my shock, realized that I was surrounded. There must have been dozens of pairs of glowing incandescent eyes all around me watching. I looked around in disbelief. Some of the creatures were smaller than the others and seemed to be hiding behind the larger ones. The largest of the creatures, the one holding Pat, stepped out into the clearing. This one must have been their leader, if you can call it that with disregard. It threw Pat's head into the center of the clearing and then stood motionless. Its eyes burned with intensity as the others looked on. At first, I had no idea why I wasn't being torn from limb to limb by now, but then I remembered what Peter had said earlier on this terrible night. He begged for his life, he made a deal with these things. The creature didn't say a word. I'm not even sure if it could, but I somehow knew what it was doing. It was making me the same deal. They know they've won and they're saying to me, everyone's dead and you will be too, unless you bring more. There's an old saying, before you judge a man to walk a mile in his shoes, well, heed that saying, as until you've been in a situation facing your certain and imminent death, you don't know. Subconsciously we all have an instinct for self-preservation. You will keep fighting to stay alive regardless of what life throws at you. In this case, life threw a disembodied head at me, and so I nodded. The group around me parted ways. To my left, almost as if showing me the way with trepidation, I backed away into the darkness as the group of inhuman creatures looked on. The hum of the car engine filled the silence. As we wound our way along dirt roads deeper into the forest, I could see the excitement on their faces from the rear-view mirror. They were completely oblivious, relaxed men. "You sure know how to find these hidden spots," Barry said from in the back seat, leaning forward with a grin. "I thought I knew every camping spot for miles, but I've never even heard of this place." "Yeah," I said, keeping my eyes on the road, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. "It's off the beaten path." Julia, sitting next to me, scrolled through her phone trying to find a signal. "No reception out here either. It'll be great to just switch off for a few days. No work emails, no stress." I forced a smile. "Yep, perfect. How'd you even find this place?" Marilyn asked from the passenger seat, glancing over at me. "Are you some kind of camping expert now?" I let out a small laugh, trying to keep it light. "Just stumbled on it once by chance, thought it'd be cool to bring you guys out here, nothing like a few days in the woods," Barry exclaimed as he opened his first beer. They had no idea the woods weren't just nature anymore, they belonged to something else. Now as we approached our destination, the lights from the setting sun started to fade, casting long shadows across the road. "How much further?" Julia asked, sitting back and taking off her sunglasses. Is not far now. I muted. We're almost there, almost there, almost to the point of no return. I glanced at them one last time. In the mirror, their faces lit with excitement and trust, a trust one didn't deserve, but it was too late now. The deal was made and soon the creatures would feast again. So guys, the video has ended now. If you like our stories and want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to Audible Odyssey channel and do all these things, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Enjoy horror and adventure stories like this. So just subscribe to Audible Odyssey. Bye bye.